Hey, it's Katie Moran, and here's your Heartfelt Lift. Today I'm here with,
LauraAura.
tell me a little bit about yourself and what is the number one question you ask people that stumps them?
Awesome. So I am a speaker and a coach. I help people to own what they actually want and to shift the mind junk so that they can go get it. And I'll tell you the number one question that I ask people that stumps them the most is when I look at them and I ask, what do you actually want? It's this it's this big question, right? Because it could go in a lot of different directions with a lot of different meanings. And honestly, it's one of the reasons that people don't, quote unquote, go there because it can be really overwhelming to really think about that. But honestly, on a deeper level, it stumps people because they think, I have no idea. No one's ever asked me that before. I haven't sat long enough to think about it. I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so that's the type of work that I love to help people with is to really figure out what it is that you really want so we can start making moves and taking action towards it.
Yeah, someone asked me that once in my life, like one time, and it changed the trajectory of my life because no one had ever asked me that before. And I was probably like over 20. And I just remember thinking, like, how has no one ever asked me that before?
Yeah, it's you know, we just get wrapped up in societal expectations, the way that we've always done things, what we think that we should do. We're caretakers by nature, right? We're helping everybody else succeed and it's like you save your stuff for last with the intention that, hey, then I'll get to that, except you know how that works, right? We always
Mm.
then push it out further and push it out further. And by the time we get to that question, it's like, wow, I, I have no idea. Like I wouldn't even know where to begin. And then like in your case, I no one's ever asked me that before. And it just wakes you up in a whole new way, right? Like you've been
Mm.
doing everything that you should do and forgot to ask yourself along the way, what do I want to do instead?
Yeah, I think it is a question that has the potential to change the direction and trajectory to your life. To obviously, the deeper you go, the more authentic that change would be. I'm curious, do you think there's anything people have to ask themselves before that, or anything that's a prerequisite to really getting an answer that is worthwhile?
Yeah, great question. I think if you ask yourself, where do I feel disruption or discontent in my life? Right. And what I mean by that is just something that either seems to always ruffle your feathers or something that you always just seemingly are longing for. Right. So let's say I'll just use career because a lot of people can relate to that. If you're in a career or a job right now or in a business that doesn't fulfill you and every day is met with resistance, every day is met with like, "Ugh, I don't want to go there, I can't wait to be done, I can't wait till Friday," right? If that's the regular narrative, that's a disruption in your life, right? And so what do you actually want? You likely want a career that is fulfilling, that
Hmm.
fuels you instead of drains you. And so we have to acknowledge the parts of our life where we're not feeling grounded and happy and content in a good way. We have to really acknowledge like, hey, these things are a constant disruption. So just look at your life in a landscape. And sometimes it's easier to point out the bad stuff, right? Because
Hmm.
our brains are hardwired to look for that kind of stuff. So if you can look at where am I consistently feeling uneasy or disrupted or unhappy, that's an area that we could start to explore.
That's so interesting. So I asked you what the prerequisites are. What does it take doing that work? Like, what is the during? What does the during of that process look like?
Of the pre figuring out what you want or
No,
as you're
so
figuring out what you want.
as you're figuring out what you want, what does that look like? Like, what are kind of like the most common problems or just things that you have to face and resolve?
Well, I can tell you that some of the reasons that people don't go after what they want, some of the common ones are first, getting what you want requires change. And we
Hmm.
all know how much We love change as human beings. I mean, we're creatures of habit. And even if you're uncomfortable with something, there's a comfort in your discomfort because you know how to handle it. So
Mhm.
getting what you want requires you to do something new. It requires you to change something in your life, whether it's a habit, a behavior, a communication, your time, the people in your world, your job. It requires something to change. And people don't like to get uncomfortable. It
Mhm.
sometimes feels easier to complain about stuff than it does to do something about it because there's just familiarity with it. The other reason that people tend to not go after this is the worry and the fear of how it's going to affect other people. So my
Mhm.
want may affect a spouse, a child, a boss, a coworker, a best friend, whatever it is, right? Like your change likely will have an impact on something or someone around you. Now, it's not your responsibility to make everybody else feel comfortable. It's good as a human being to keep in mind how things affect people, but ultimately you have to do what's best for you. And
Mhm.
so a lot of people avoid making changes because they don't want to upset the cart. They don't want to upset somebody else. They don't want to, put any pressure on someone else, right? Like something as simple as asking for help. No, I would much rather just do that on my own because I couldn't put somebody else out, right? I'll just carry that burden on my own. That's a small change, but it's something that we all, experience in some form or another. So, really just acknowledging what is the fear behind your change? What is the fear that's driving why you are not doing this or why you've not acknowledged this first? And if we can acknowledge that and see that, we can make that part of the process and part of the story so that you're not consistently fighting yourself, but rather welcoming this to be a part of the process so that we can evolve and grow through and with it. And then as you're working towards what you actually want, 9 times out of 10, it's mindset, my friend. It's the stuff that you are saying in your head and it's the habits that you have in your world. And so, like I mentioned earlier, it requires change. So we have to do things differently. We have to be more intentional. We have to lean into stuff. We have to often make gutsy moves, right?
Mhm.
And something I want everyone to know loud and clear too is like getting what you want is not an overnight thing. We have to be patient with ourselves. If we have clarity, right? Clarity meaning you either know what you want or you know the direction, then we can start taking action towards it instead of away from it. And as long as you're taking action, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant it may look or feel, you're still moving. You're still making it happen. So releasing the expectation of time, how long it should take you to do something,
Mhm.
as long as you're continuously moving towards it, you're actually making it happen.
That's so interesting. What does it require for someone to maintain the change once they made it? And also, do you feel that it's not so much just one change, but it's continually asking yourself that question and having the courage to get closer each time you answer it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as people were consistently evolving. So, what I wanted 10 years ago is different than what I want now, but it's because I've grown and evolved as a human, right? I've matured. I've gotten even more clear on what I want, right? This clarity, this next thing that you want doesn't have to be the see all be all end all. It's the right next thing for this chapter of your life. And you asked about maintaining it once you get there. Are you talking about the once you get there or the process of getting there?
I think you made a really good point about the process of getting there and having that really be the hurdle of not being turned away at the idea of change and having courage to do that. But I am really interested in this idea of like, what does it take to step into that person that always faces that question and makes a change after? Or do you feel like it really is like one time, like with that one bit of honesty that gets you closer to your goal?
I see. No, it's continuous.
Mhm.
I'd love to tell you that, like, if you just have one good gutsy move, then it'll all fall into place. But
And
turns
it sounds silly when I think
I
about it, but I'm
no,
sure.
but
Yeah.
it's a great question, right? Because I think sometimes in our mind we think that's how it should be. And then when it doesn't happen that way, or we have to continuously come up to the plate,
Hmm.
then we're like, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm doing this wrong. This is taking too long. This isn't working out, right? We play all that stuff in our mind. So
Hmm.
knowing like, hey, getting to where you want to be or go or have the things that you want is going to require consistent leaning in. You're going to continuously be faced with times and obstacles and situations where you have to make a decision, right? Like if you're working towards something and you're dedicating, I don't know, 2 hours every Monday to work towards it, right? This is
Hmm.
just really methodical, but work with me here. And something pops up like, hey, do you want to go get lunch? And it falls in that bracket of time. You're faced with a decision. Am I going to go get lunch or am I going to work towards the thing that I want? Or, someone's asking for a meeting in that time frame. Are you going to hold that time sacred or are you going to take the meeting? Right?
Hmm.
Maybe you're just not feeling it that day. You're uninspired. You're feeling like, have the shitty fuckets, right? Of yourself. And you're like, oh, I just like nothing's working out, but it's that time. Are you gonna lean into, I don't feel good about myself, or are you gonna try? So it's all these like little micro moments where you're faced with having to make a decision of like, am I gonna go back or am I gonna go forward? So it's consistent work. And one of the things that's so beneficial as you're doing this is some other people, right? Like as you're doing this stuff, making change alone is not impossible. People do it all the time, but it's way easier when you've got a handful of people around you that are either making their own changes or that you can lean on to help guide you and hold you accountable as you go. Because listen, the Wild West in your brain, in all of our brains, can talk you out of things before you even get started. So having people around you is really key.
That's so profound. Thank you so much for coming on today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.